So I just got through discovering what I had written many months and years ago in this wonderful study I had from these resources that these men have provided for me, especially the videotapes, which I had to transcribe a lot. It took a lot of work. How could the animals and man and plants come out of that ark, or wherever they were from? And by the way, most of them were not from the ark. Just certain animals that couldn't survive the worldwide flood. But other insects, birds, fish, have unique mechanisms that help them survive through that worldwide flood. And then they began to procreate and expand throughout the planet. Didn't take very long. Don't forget, we had centuries of animal and plant and human life to grow. So, I hope you're with me on that. Evidence of Ice Age points to a recent catastrophic worldwide flood. Point 1, onset of the Ice Age. Introduction. The lowering of the temperature of the polar latitudes as the vapor canopy. I call that, I really want to say ice, not vapor, because vapor would cover the entire planet and prevent the sun from getting to the earth to begin with. So we'd have no sun, no life. But it was an ice canopy which was so super frozen that the H2O, hydrogen, was metallic and allowed the conduction of ice through the sunlight, through the ice canopy, and contained the atmosphere to be more than 30% higher in oxygen density. Things grew remarkably larger and faster. So, as the ice canopy precipitated and would have had immediate and important climatologic reactions. However, the initially warm temperature of the water in the polar seas, Ice Age, polar seas, so that's together with its continuing turbulent state sufficed to prevent its freezing for a period of unknown but substantial duration. So a number of centuries would have done it. Undoubtedly, the first water actually to freeze would have been that mixed in with the sediments being deposited in those regions, cut off, as it were, from the warmer temperatures and the turbulent agitation of the free water in the open seas. Remember, there was a permafrost. How did you get soil up there? How did you get plant and animal matter up there? Obviously, it wasn't always frozen, those polar caps. Thus, must have been formed at some intermediate or late stage in the Deluge period, those vast stretches of permanently frozen soils in the Arctic and the subarctic known as permafrost. How did they get to be frozen? They obviously weren't, and there's vegetable and animal matter. Embedded in these frozen mucks of the Arctic are large numbers of fossil mammals, apparently trapped and in some cases partially frozen before the soft parts had decayed. The extensive silty alluvium, now frozen in central Alaska, contains numerous mammal fauna. Freezing has preserved the skin and tissue of some of the mammals. The faunal list includes 2 bears, dire wolf, fox, badger, wolverine, saber-tooth. Here's a list of how many of each is probably uncountable. Saber-tooth cat, jaguar, lynx, woolly mammoth, mastodon, 2 horses, 2 kinds of horses, camel, saiga, antelope, 4 bison, caribou, moose, stag moose, elk, 2 sheep, musk ox, maybe it's quantity, they're doing a population here, and yak types, different types, we found this and that, ground sloth and shovel rodents. Who knows how many more they would have found if they kept looking. The number of individuals is so great that the assemblage as a whole must represent a rather long time. That's what this guy's saying. How do you know? Maybe it was quick. He's just saying, well, according to my thinking. Well, let's not go to your thinking. Let's look at plausible possibilities. That these mammals and the freezing of the alluvium now containing them represents a rather sharp change of climate is quite obvious. The time of inception of permafrost remains, nevertheless, unknown. The fossil record, according to this evolutionist, supposedly implies that in earlier Cenozoic time, there could have been no permafrost in the Arctic region. The areas of former ice sheet bears no evidence in relation to the distribution of permafrost. So they're left with, I don't know, let's guess, or don't, just shrug your shoulders. How about, have you ever considered worldwide flood and the time thereafter? So, J.K. Charlesworth says, vast herds of mammoth and other animals, the New Siberian islands in the far north of Asia have yielded mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, musk ox, sagas, antelope, reindeer, tiger, Arctic fox, glutton, bear, and horse. Among the 66 animal species required forests, meadows, and steppes for their sustenance, and could not have lived in a climate like the present, with its icy winds, snowy winters, frozen ground, and tundra moss the year round. Think, how about a little bit of reasonable reverse engineering here? The Quaternary era. They're presenting the inconsistencies with their own theories or ideas, and never tried to say, well, maybe the other guy is right on the other side of the Bible, right? Worldwide flood. Larry Vardaman states in his article entitled Cooling of the Ocean After the Flood in Impact Brochure 277. Here it is. This guy is good. I like this guy. He's a really deep scientific thinker, but he's able to write stuff that I can understand as a layman. Introduction. If all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered by the flood, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth, as described Genesis 7:19-21, then it is likely that massive global upheavals of the crust and oceans were involved. If the geologic column is a record of catastrophic events of the flood over a period of about a year, some 5,000 years ago, then large quantities of heat would have been released from frictional forces of erosion and from crustal motions such as continental breakup, plate subduction, and earthquakes. Remember the good old volcano and earthquake thing? Look all around the world, you got hundreds of them. North, south, east, and west. Because the oceans would have been in direct contact with many of the sources of heat, the water would have been warmed and remained so for some time following the flood. Record of heat in the sediments. Layers of sediment averaging about 1,000 feet thick cover the seafloor all over the earth. Samples of these sediments have been extracted by deep sea drilling techniques which have led to a better understanding of Earth history. Seafloor sediments not only contain sand and mud eroded from the continents, but also shells of microorganisms which lived and died in the ocean. Some of these microorganisms, called foraminifera, incorporate varying quantities of oxygen isotopes in their shells as the temperature changes, allowing them to be used as a paleothermometer, an instrument for estimating temperature in the past. Kennett et al. Have analyzed the concentration of oxygen isotopes in foraminifera, which live on the seafloor near the Antarctic, using a conventional timescale which assumes that the seafloor sediments have accumulated over millions of years at a rate similar to that observed today. They found a slow decrease in temperature of about 20 degrees centigrade. Let me just fix that question mark and make it degrees. Okay. Since the end of the Cretaceous period, when the dinosaurs lived, was so warm. I mean, they wouldn't survive, right? However, if these same data are interpreted from a young Earth catastrophic flood perspective, an entirely different result is found. Using a biblical timescale which assumes that the seafloor sediments have accumulated mostly over a few thousand years during and following the Genesis flood, initially at a very high rate and decreasing exponentially to that observed today, Vardaman found, another co-author of this Creation Institute, Vardaman found a rapid decrease in temperature immediately after the flood, followed by a slower decrease with time. Most of this cooling will have only taken about 2,000 years to reach temperatures commonly observed today. That's only 20 centuries. And look what we got. The shape of the cooling curve is similar to that expected by a body starting at a high temperature and cooling by heat transfer to a cooler reservoir. The rate of cooling is rapid initially, but slows with time, approaching the final temperature asymptomatically, in other words, in a relatively straight line. During the steep portion of the cooling curve, the climate of the Earth would be expected to change dramatically as the oceans cool by some 20 degrees centigrade. Today, when the ocean surface averages only 1 or 2 degrees warmer than during an El Nino event, major changes occur in circulation and precipitation pattern over the entire Pacific Ocean to major storms and flooding on the west coast of North and South America. How much more dramatic would climate changes be for a 20 degree centigrade cooling? See? Rapid implications of a cooling ocean. So if the model of seafloor sediment accumulation described above is correct, the implications are dramatic. Most of the sediments found on the seafloor were deposited rapidly just a few thousand years ago. The rate of accumulation would have been very rapid during and immediately following the flood. Not only erosion of sands and muds from the continents would have been involved, but also the accumulation of microscopic plant and animal organisms from the ocean itself, which were catastrophically deposited in less than 6 months by virtue of the worldwide flood. And now we have erosion. This would indicate that the tiny organisms in the ocean probably bloomed following the flood due to all the nutrients added by the flood and the greater warmth as the oceans increased in temperature, as well as fewer large predators, allowing a continued rapid doubling of biomass. See? This can happen rapidly. Not just the worldwide flood, but the restoration of man, plants, and animals. The warm ocean would have produced at least 4 significant atmospheric effects. Much greater evaporation of water vapor from the ocean to the atmosphere would have led to greater storminess and precipitation, particularly in the polar regions. Large temperature contrasts between the oceans and continents would have produced strong winds and heavy precipitation parallel to coastlines. The blooming of ocean life following the flood would likely have absorbed large quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, causing radiational cooling. Remember, there's no more frozen, super frozen ice canopy over the Earth, a water canopy. Now, the radiation comes directly to the planet via the sun. No protection from ultraviolet radiation, and dramatic, because of the rotation of the Earth, dramatic differences from one side of the planet to the other periodically. Warm oceans and radiational cooling aloft would create more convection in the atmosphere, leading to more precipitation all over the world. The atmospheric effects appear to be an adequate explanation for the Ice Age. There you go, which produced the more extensive glaciers than today, and massive sheets of ice over large areas of the polar regions and mid-latitudes. That's why you have ice on the top and the bottom of the planet, which was caused by the Ice Age. And the worldwide flood, the water largely came from above as well as subterranean caverns, and now we have no protection from the sun, violent changes in weather, precipitation, no consistency, and now extremes of temperature from super cold to super hot. The Ice Age in the biblical time frame probably lasted from shortly after the flood to about the time of Abraham, a couple of thousand years. The Ice Age probably affected the peoples of the Bible with a cooler, wetter climate and more grasslands in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, Palestine, and North Africa. These regions are known for their desert climate today, but evidence points to more vegetation in the past. How do you figure that one out? Oh yeah, let's go back to uniformitarianism. No, it goes back and forth. So once the oceans cooled to the equilibrium temperatures of today, the climate reached a stable condition with only relatively minor variations. Generally, the world's climate would be expected to be drier as less moisture was transported into the atmosphere from a cooler ocean, winds along continental boundaries weakened, less carbon dioxide was removed from the atmosphere, leading to warming atmospheric temperatures and convection decreased, variations in climate would be primarily produced